Hill in Charles Farrier. Charles Farrier has come over from the UK with the UK group. He's here to discuss with the scrutiny panel on CCTV. They've got a rather narrow remit, but we're talking more generally about developments in surveillance. Charles, since you come from the UK, how's it going over there? Is it an improving or a worsening situation as far as you're concerned?
I would say on the whole it's worsening, though we've just recently had a small victory in the fact that we challenged number plate recognition cameras where they'd encircled a small town in Hertfordshire with a ring of steel around a small sleepy town. We challenged that and we've had a victory at stage 1 of our challenge on that. So that's some good news, but I'd say on the whole...
How was that challenge made? Through courts or through what?
It was made through Data Protection Act, through a complaint. So there's a complaint procedure under data protection. So it went to the Information Commissioner's office, it went to a tribunal, and the tribunal found in our favour. So it didn't have to go to... It went to a sort of a small court, but not a normal court as such, that you didn't attend. But it was found by a tribunal, decided to go in our favour. Now
you're one of several groups in the UK who are looking critically at the CCTV and related issues. Now in Jersey, Bob, you're a member of the human rights group, but there's no group here specifically looking at CCTV. The scrutiny panel set it up to have an examination. What does the human rights group think about it? Have they had a discussion on it? Have they...
I think most of our discussions are quite general, really. I don't think we've actually formed any particular view. We have made representations to scrutiny panels in the past. I hope we'll make one on CCTV cameras, but as a talking shop, you could say per se throughout the island, it's almost non-existent. And our human rights is only really a small group of people getting together with a concerned view.
How does that grab you, Charles? The thought that they're in a little community, independent to all intents and purposes, it's now got fairly intensive surveillance in one way or another. The idea that there might not be any group monitoring it critically, would that worry you?
Well, it is a worry, but it's indicative of the general situation really in the UK as well, that most people just aren't concerned about these issues anywhere near enough. For some reason or another, this is not the focus of people's daily lives. It's become so invisible. As the technology gets smaller and smaller, it appears to be not affecting people. People don't really worry about it, and it's the normalisation. If you go back to the 1990s when cameras were first going up, there would have been a shock factor originally. Now there is no shock factor in cameras being put up and being expanded, and this is the problem. And this is the problem that we see, is that people don't know. They're missing, it was sold to them as one thing, been taken for granted, now move on. And now when people are now starting to go back and say, actually, well, the reasons it was sold to you for don't stack up, it's almost too late, because most people have moved on from that point, and that's
I mean, it's the old nothing to hide, nothing to fear thing, but can we trust the authorities to behave properly with it? Can we? Somebody must be monitoring them, surely.
Well, I think it comes to the idea about, it's optimistic to believe that you can trust the government, but it's stupid to believe you can trust every government going forward in the future until the end of time. You just don't know where things will be in another 50 years' time, another 100 years' time. And as the technology increases, giving the tools that most totalitarian governments would have loved to have had in our recent history, things like the Stasi in East Germany, things like that, to states that are supposedly functioning Western democracies, in the hope that there will never be a change in that ever in the future, is I think stupid.
You've been in government here, Bob, for quite a few years. Do you trust this government to administer things like CCTV?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I'd like to think I could, and my concern about CCTV cameras, in fact, I can see the purpose of having them. I think the primary object of any efficient police force should be prevention of crime. And indeed, if the police can introduce any means to reduce crime, that's got to be a plus. And of course, I think that's what you were saying, Charles. Initially, that was the reaction taken when we had CCTV cameras first in the UK, that they were going to detect, first of all, prevent crime. If people knew they're likely to be seen on camera, that may well be detected or stop them doing it in the first place. And if they are then seen, that may be an easier way then for detecting them. But I think at the same time, we've got to have safeguards. If a policeman's walking down the streets and he effectively is a CCTV camera because he keeps recording what he's doing, what he's seeing.
Well, they're now going to have cameras on their
Well,
persons.
I know that's another step again beyond that. But generally speaking, the normal police officer walking down the street, he is accountable. If we are concerned about what he's doing or the way he's done something, he is accountable. But this is a concern, I think, as a human rights group that we would be having, is that what accountability are there or is there for people with CCTV?
Ironically, of course, the Channel Islands were occupied during the Second World War, and you'd have thought it'd be the first place to have human rights outcry about sort of these impositions by a police force keeping an eye on everybody, wouldn't you? Yeah. But it hasn't happened that way. It's quite the opposite, isn't it? It's dragging its feet on things out there.
I'm going to sneeze. That's a good one for the camera. Oh. But anyway, as we're saying, I don't have a great problem about the cameras, but I'm concerned about how accountable they are. And if indeed people want to put them up, should they be open so people know they're there, or should they be covert? These are the sort of questions I hope that will be raised tomorrow.
Can you recall, you were probably in the States when the cameras were introduced here, can you recall that there was any discussion about them?
No, I think it's just one of those things, as Charles was saying, in the UK. They just appear and we all think they're going to stop crime, and that's the answer. But are they stopping crime, or are they now being used for an ulterior motive? This is the concern I think we have to have.
And there are very few. I went around town the other day trying to look for signs saying you are being watched. There's very few signs around town. The police haven't got any signs up to say that their cameras are installed.
Many years ago I got involved in trying to sort out some of the problems at Liberation Square when Liberation Square was first opened, and there was a concern about the late night drinking and everything else, and there was great calls then for CCTV cameras, and the police were not in support of them, strange as it may seem at that time. But nowadays, no doubt, they've got more money, and they may be there already. Is
that an obligation in the UK, that there shall be a sign to say you're being watched?
There are rules in the data protection laws governing cameras that you're supposed to have signs, but nobody follows those. There have been several studies by Camera Watch and other groups that look at the regulatory side of cameras and have found that 80% of cameras in the UK do not abide by that regulation, by those rules. But it's simply too much work now, because there's so many people breaking the rules. There's almost no way of enforcing them, so it's become a joke, really, that they're.
Of course, you just come through Jersey Airport, where there's the police have got cameras, their customs have got cameras, immigration have got cameras. I think G4S, the security firm, have probably got cameras. Everybody's operating camera systems of their own. Whether there's any coordination, whether A looks at B, looks at C, I have no idea. But that sort of growth, it can't be necessary, can it, in a closed building which is under constant surveillance anyway?
No, but it comes down to the industry that sells this stuff, the security industry. An airport becomes a market for these goods, and what they tend to do is one size fits all. They'll have a company that'll come in, pitch some gear to these people, and whether it be Madrid Airport or Jersey Airport, they'll sell the same kind of kit, the same systems, the same risk assessments will be done, the same paperwork. So they'll sit down and someone will come up with the grid of all the risks and say, well, somebody could come through with this particular risk. The risk may be so minuscule, but it'd be factored into one of these grids, and they'll spend the money on putting this kit in for no apparent reason, just because there's the smallest possibility.
Part of the reason that scrutiny are now looking at CCTV at all is partly because I asked for it, but partly because the police in Jersey are about to upgrade. They're going to get a new system. Now, we haven't been told what the capabilities will be for that system, but what is the sort of potential? What could it be doing?
Well, the first thing that nowadays that's switched from the old cameras to now is they're digital. So it used to be that they were analog cameras. They're now digital, so they're higher quality. A lot of them tend to be IP-based cameras rather than fibre optic. So it used to be you needed a big pole where you'd run telephone cables. That was very costly. It was the telephone lines that were the more expensive bit, the fibre optic cables back to the control room. When they become IP-based cameras, that's internet protocol. That means they can be networked. That means you can stick a camera on almost anything, anywhere, You just need a power supply to get to it. If you can, some of them can be hooked up to wireless internet, and then they can be run back to a control room. But that also means they can run to other locations. They don't have to go to one place. You can start centralising control. So in the UK, what we'll see is police forces in multiple areas combining control rooms, so that we're starting to see a creep towards what programs that show you how awful this stuff is will show you one big control room where someone in the security services pulls up every camera in Britain, and that until now has not been possible. But slowly,
and there's no reason why Jersey couldn't link to that if it wanted to.
Eventually, certainly that would be the case. Once you start upgrading to these newer types of camera, they're not CCTV anymore. They're internet webcams, really.
And it's face recognition, eyeball recognition, all that sort of technology is included. That's part of the game, is it?
Well, those things we could go in software afterwards. They don't need to go into the camera anymore. Once the cameras are of a certain resolution, then that's a software program that run afterwards. So something like facial recognition isn't ready yet, but what you would be having is sort of like an HD-ready TV, a CCTV camera, or say internet webcam, that is ready for the upgrades in the software later. So you open the door to all sorts of possibilities. So the police can quite truthfully say, we have no intention of using facial recognition at this stage, and that might well be because it's not available at this stage. But 5 years down the line, that might just be a simple upgrade on their computers, not on the camera.
Of course, what is a bit unusual about Jersey is, of course, it is the police force who are running the cameras. That isn't what usually happens in most places, is it?
It tends to be the local authorities in the UK, the local councils, but often in partnership with the police. So someone like Oxfordshire is sort of it's operated from the police stations, and it's 50% funded by the police and 50% funded by the council. So it's not 100% run by the police in the UK, but it's...
We're talking at the moment about the government-led, government-owned camera systems. Of course, an incredible amount of it is private stuff, isn't it? Private installations, over which there is very, very little control. Nobody knows what they're looking at or why they're looking at it to a large extent. Is that something that worries you, Bob?
Yeah, I think so. And also, I think what we ought to know is that if we work on the assumption that cameras are there for the protection of crime rather than detection. But what I'm concerned about is that the fact of how long the cameras, or how long is the film kept for. I recently assisted someone who, someone had gone into a bank on 40 different occasions and taken money, or withdrawn money. And when I said, well, there must be cameras up, they said, oh yes they are, but of course we only keep them up for 3 months afterwards. Well, I thought, what's the point of having the cameras? Why can't we have... There must be some means now of storing this material for much longer. What's the point of 3 months? But again, I don't know whether that's all part and parcel of what's coming up with scrutiny. I would hope it would be. I think if it's legitimate to keep something, so in other words, if a police officer walks down the street and he sees something, providing that police officer is alive, that information is with that police officer for years to come. So if one needs to speak to him about it, he can go into court and give evidence. However, if someone's caught on a camera doing something untoward, but the film is lost, what's the point of having it?
We're told that buses in Jersey, the public transport system, they've got 5 cameras on a bus plus audio recording in part of the bus, and now we've got police officers going around sitting on the buses to get to wherever they want to go in the island, and police officers have got their own CCTV cameras on their jackets. A huge amount of observation going on just on the bus system. Is that the sort of thing that goes on in the UK?
Absolutely, it's a huge worry in the UK. There's a ridiculous amount of cameras on buses. You say, sort of, in the UK there'll be buses with 6 cameras, same sort of thing. If you look back to the early days of installing CCTV, city centres would have had 6 cameras, a whole city centre, not one bus. It's a ludicrous overreaction, but it's also more than that, because the concern is that you normalise people to this being the absolutely standard procedure, that there is nothing extraordinary, that you must be happy with surveillance wherever you go, whatever you're doing, no problem at all. You know, young people now, if you're under a certain age, you won't know a world without CCTV. As far as you're concerned, that is standard. That's normal.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, it's suggested here that buses, for example, they've got camera. I think one of the cameras is mounted outside. So if they encountered any criminal activity or untoward activity going on outside the bus, they can be used to record the activity outside the bus. Would that be an acceptable development?
Yeah, I think that's a terrible development. So we've seen that in Scotland, where bus companies have been doing the same thing. What it's effectively doing is bringing in cameras, street cameras, by stealth, by saying it's just a bus, but actually, in reality, it's filming people as they go about the daily business. And what you've got to remember is CCTV, most of the time, the vast majority, huge degree, is law-abiding people going about their daily business, minding their business, doing absolutely nothing wrong, which is none of the business of the state.
Of course, again, we're tending to talk here about public spaces, but a lot of surveillance goes on inside buildings, employers spying on their staff,
Yes.
all that. I mean, is anybody monitoring that? Does your organisation monitor that in the UK?
It's very very difficult indeed. I mean, unions are trying to, but they're surprisingly protective of that part of their work. So we don't actually have very good relations with the unions on that, but it is a worrying thing. We do occasionally get members of the public, people who work for some of these organisations, telling us about abuses, but they're often frightened to speak out.
What are the abuses? Sharing this information at some show, or have a drinks party and say, we'll probably watch the camera, and this is what went on outside the bus station.
Well, it's much more common. What we find that the people we've had come to us is it's spying on the cameras are supposedly there for crime prevention, but what actually happens is that the boss or the manager will spy on the staff from some remote location. So what will happen is he'll come in and say, why weren't you washing up the cups, or why won't you do this, why weren't you doing that, you should have been here, you should have been that. So that suddenly they feel as though they're under this gaze all the time, which is this idea of a panopticon that Jeremy Bentham created, this perfect prison. If you're at work and your boss is nipped off for 5 minutes, to suddenly have this feeling that you don't know if he's now up in the office watching every move you make, there's a creepy feeling, and that's the justification for the cameras is they're there, these are here because there might be a robbery or something. But in actual fact, they're not about robbery. They've suddenly become about spying on your staff, and there's a
whole lot of surveillance which isn't part of the current Jersey CCTV examination. Surveillance when you go into a shop and buy something, and the records are kept on you, telephone conversations, what you watch on television. I mean, it's not just anymore about this simple thing about cameras and what you're doing on a routine daily basis. And you join all the information together, and somebody's got a wonderful, very detailed picture about anybody who breathes, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think that's another one of the worries, is this idea that if somebody said to you, where were you Tuesday afternoon, 3rd of April, 4 years ago, where were you? And you quite rightly would say, I have no idea. But in my worldview they say, well, we know where you were, and
but
we know what you did.
Again, I was saying again, how do you know that? Because how long are people keeping the films for? I know from the bank point of view, they said they only had 3 months. Again, how long will the police keep them for?
Well, I can tell you with the number plate recognition cameras, which is where we consider it to be a ridiculous amount of retention, which is 2 years. A law-abiding member of the public driving along the road will be retained in a database for 2 years. So a policeman could say to you, we know where you were 4 o'clock in the afternoon 2 years ago in your car. For no good reason they've got that information for 2 years. It used to be 30 days was a standard retention period for footage under data protection, but that was mostly governed by the fact that tapes needed to be changed. There is actually no official retention period in data protection law. It doesn't actually say how long stuff has to be retained, but it's generally considered that if there is an incident, the retention period goes up. So when the bank, often you'll get people using data protection as a smoke screen for their inefficiencies. They say, oh, we had to do this or do that because of data protection. When in actual fact, you'll probably find the bank, they're the problem there, not the laws governing what they do.
We've had some huge scandals recently in newspapers, misusing access, these sort of things, filming, recording. News of the World, one of the biggest selling newspapers in the world, closed down. At its root was the misuse of data protection to a large extent. We've heard about the American government trawling the world for information about everything, collecting information about everybody and everything. I mean, it can't be stopped, can it? This has got too big, isn't it, this whole thing?
It's difficult to stop, and it certainly needs people to be concerned about it. And unfortunately, an awful lot of people, if you said to them, everything you do, every second of every day is being stored and monitored and put somewhere, an awful lot of people would say, well, I've done nothing wrong, that doesn't bother me, which is a terrible situation, really, because it used to be that people considered, they used to understand that you most deserve your privacy and your freedom if you've done nothing wrong. There used to be residual rights was certainly a fundamental principle of English law, which is that you could do anything unless it was harming other people, and some sort of law was introduced.
Well, Dave, our Prime Minister, has declared this week that Jersey is not a tax haven, but of course tax haven, the whole mentality is about secrecy and privacy. So in the terms of reality, is it now the situation that there is no such thing as secrecy? Governments know what's going on in banks. If they want to tap in, phone up America and say, what's he got in his bank account?
They'll claim they have a right to know. And this is the problem.
But in practical terms, is that what can happen?
No.
Is there
know what for? You know,
we hear about
what,
encryption,
what
but you know about computers. Is there such a thing as encryption anymore? Can governments just access anything they want?
Well, they're certainly able to break an awful lot of encryption. The computing power nowadays is huge. But I think when we talk about there's no secrecy, there's a huge amount of secrecy on the other side, isn't there? And that's the problem. They
know, we don't.
Yeah, so we have to trust them. So they'll say, we can't tell you why we're doing something. For instance, look at something like the National CCTV strategy. There's a big section in it on why they do certain things, and it says, this all stuff comes under national security, so we can't tell you anything about it. So we can know everything about you, you can't know everything about us. And so there's not transparency, there's not equality of arms here. And if you consider the fact that a government is just meant to be a representative of the people, how can, if the people have no rights to privacy, how can when you stick a load of people together, do they suddenly magically get more rights than the people they're protecting?
Last word, Bob. Little sweet old-fashioned Jersey. What does it sound like to you?
It's sad, really. I think it's just part of life. You find that they've got some form of technology, so we must use it. You know, we've talked about, before we came on camera, I said about the escalation of policing methods. So every step they take, they move away from consensus policing. You have your policeman on the beat with his truncheon in his pocket. He would get into serious trouble if he used it. Now it's taken for granted. He's got it there. If he needs to use it, he uses it. No doubt he's still accountable for it. At the same time, I think the tendency is now to use it. You move on to CS gas, and again, that's being used. And even worse, I think, is the fact of the handcuffs. I bore handcuffs. I think handcuffs are there for someone who's really dangerous, really violent. What's wrong? We're trying to restrain someone with a good old-fashioned way of lock arms and etc. But it seems to be that every move we make, and indeed I think cameras are the same thing, it's another step away from formal policing. The more you move away, the less you can trust the police officer. That's a shame. It shouldn't be that.
We're going to stop there. Thanks for you too. Bye.